Hello again, and welcome to the last of our Introduction to Photography series. I'm Doug Johnson, your host, Doug Johnson. And tonight we're going to be talking about some Photoshop type techniques for improving the look of your pictures. And we're going to actually start out with a quiz for the things we talked about last time. You guys are loving quizzes, I know it. So, okay, let's jump right into it. Question number 1. The primary colors are, hold on, let me turn on the video for people who are here so you can see. Okay, the primary colors are, remember there can be multiple answers. Okay, A, red, yellow, and blue. B, red, green, and blue. C, red, yellow, and green. And D, cyan, magenta, and yellow.
B and D.
B and D. Any other opinions? Yay! B and D are correct. Primary colors, red, green, and blue are the primary colors for light, and cyan, magenta, and yellow are the primary colors for pigments. Okay, alright, so moving on to question 2. Mixing red and green will result in A, blue, B, yellow, C, brown, D, a comedic television show. Any?
Brown. C.
Okay.
C and D.
Okay, I'm hearing C and D. Correct answers are B and C. Because when you mix red and green light, you get yellow. Remember we looked at the diagram last week? You mix red and green pigments, you get a brown color. So, there we go. Okay. All right, question 3. Which of the following pairs are truly complementary colors? A, red and green. B, red and cyan. C, blue and orange. D, green and magenta.
A and C.
Here an A and C.
I was about to say B and D.
Okay, Kyle says B and D.
I think C is definitely, and
I don't know.
I don't know if
Is it B?
A looks good.
They all look good. I'm hearing everything here. Okay. All right, the real correct answers here are B and D. We'll pull up a color wheel here in a minute, and you'll see why those are the real complementary colors.
Well, they're totally opposites, and there's 3. They're gotta be off.
Okay? All right. So, moving on to question number 4. Which of the following could be used to diffuse a light source? A collapsible diffuser. B, a piece of paper. C, a collapsible reflector. And D, a bed sheet. Oh wait, and we have an E on this one. A white wall or ceiling. What can be used to diffuse a light source?
Everything.
A, B, D.
Wait, what, Brent?
Nice spelling of white.
Oh, oops, typo.
Oh, so it
Ignore
looks
that.
like
I'll fix that for the video.
If the lights are hot enough.
I say everything. Maybe not A, maybe not C,
Reflectors.
but
Yeah.
Well, as traditional sense, diffuser, I'd probably say. Collapsible diffuser, obviously.
Right?
If the light's bright enough, a bed sheet, and the sheet's thin enough.
We
Are you
talked
saying
about the
reflecting
paper on
off
the
or going
bedsheet,
through?
didn't
Diffusers.
we?
Go
Go
through.
through.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
A, B, and D. A, B, and D.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see what we got. A, B, D, and E, and then I put C in italics because you could actually use a collapsible reflector to diffuse a light source. Remember last week I said anytime that light reflects off of an object that's not metallic, it diffuses that light source. So if you have a reflector that's actually white, you could use that as a diffuser by bouncing light off of it. So not really the primary purpose, but you could do it. So just about anything could be used for diffusing a light source. Okay? All right. And question number 5. The primary difference between a diffuser and a reflector is A, whether it's transparent or not. B, its size. C, its color. D, its location. And E, its price. Okay, we're hearing an A. Any other answers?
Well, the wall's not transparent.
Kyle the bright one.
So I'd say probably its location.
Okay. Bingo. Its location. Diffusers go between the light source and your subject. Reflectors go outside of the light source and your subject. You put your subject between your reflector and your light source. So, answer there is its location. So that's the only difference. Okay. All right. So, any questions on diffusers, reflectors, or colors? Yeah.
How does a wall and a ceiling then act as
As
the
a
diffuser?
diffuser?
Is it the fact that the light is indirectly coming through?
Yeah, it's exactly what we've got going on here. I
Yeah.
know on camera you can't see that, but our light sources here are bouncing off the ceiling, producing a very diffuse light source.
And that's not a reflector because it's not actually reflecting the exact
It's-
light as a beam?
Right,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, it's diffusing the light into a larger area where it's not a distinct,
So for a high
Source.
gloss, maybe it'll be a reflector.
to some degree, right. Okay. All right, so anyway, there we go. That's reflectors and diffusers. And today we're going to actually jump back into color because when we talk about doing Photoshop stuff, there's a lot of things related to color. So, all right, as mentioned before, the primary colors for light are red, green, and blue. All right? All right, and these happen to be the same colors that the cones in our retinas are sensitive to. So our eyes see in red, green, and blue, and that's how we discern color. And all visible colors are made up of varying amounts of red, green, and blue, all the visible light. So any color that we can see with our eyes is made up of red, green, and blue. Okay? Follow? That makes sense?
Meaning our eyes detect those three colors in varying shades.
Right, exactly. Right, and here we have what happened, a little diagram that kind of indicates what happens when you mix different colors of light. So we have our red, green, and blue. You mix your red and your blue and you get magenta. Okay, you mix your red and your green and you get yellow, red and green, and you get cyan, which are also the green and blue and you get cyan. Yeah, sorry. You mix them and you get the primary colors for pigments. They're also called secondary colors. So, okay? All right, now, along with different mixing, actually I should go back if I can. Okay, and notice in the middle there, if you mix all three colors, you get white. And that's an important thing that we're going to be needing to know and cover in a minute. Okay. All right, so, all right, each primary color has a complement, and it's also referred to as a secondary color. And we need to memorize this, so everybody pay close attention. The opposite or complementary color of red is cyan. The opposite or complementary of green is magenta. The opposite or complementary of blue is yellow. Okay, this is going to be really important once we jump into Photoshop here because we're going to utilize these principles to try and make our photos look better. So memorize that. Quick quiz, opposite of green is?
Yellow. Magenta.
Magenta, yes. Okay, opposite of yellow?
Blue.
Magenta?
Green.
Red.
Easy with your sheet up there.
Yeah, I should hide that, huh? Hide the cheat sheet, okay. All right, opposite of yellow.
Blue.
Opposite of magenta.
Green.
Okay, all right, you guys got it. So, good deal. Okay, so, all right. When we're working on the computer, we work in what we call a 24-bit RGB color space. Anybody want to field a guess as what RGB stands for?
Red, green, blue.
Very good. And like I say, every color is made up of varying amounts of red, green, and blue. So we have RGB. And okay, the 24-bit part here means that each channel with the red, the green, and the blue is given 8 bits. We're talking about binary numbers here. To store its data for each pixel. I mean, the pixels are just the smallest dots and make up a picture. So 24-bit images, which is what we normally work with, each color has 8 bits to work with. Okay? And when we have 8 bits per channel, that means we have values from 0 to 255 to represent how much of that color is in any given pixel. So the 255 comes from 2 to the 8th power, So you get 256 possible values there. So little geeky, but once we get into Photoshop, that will be very useful because we're actually going to start seeing those numbers and we're going to be playing with them and using those numbers to try and figure out what's going on with the picture and what we can do to try and make it look better. So all important stuff. Okay? All right. Now, when we're talking about colors on the computer, we measure them by the amounts of red, green, and blue, and we notate it like this, with the first three numbers, first one being red, second being green, and third being blue. So 255.00 is a fully saturated red, 0.255.0 is green, 0.0255 is blue, and so forth. So you've got also got your opposite colors down there, their secondary colors down at the bottom. Anybody notice anything strange about the secondary colors and how they relate to the primary?
Is it the mix of red and green, yellow? And so if you've got full red and full green, it turns out to be, is that what you're
Yep,
talking about?
no, that's one thing, yeah,
And then
definitely.
the same-
Inverted.
Yeah, they're always inverted. That's the other one too. So if we've got a red, which is 255.00. Its opposite is what?
It's opposite of
Which is cyan. So remember from our chart we memorized a minute ago, the 0, 255, 255 is cyan, and that is the opposite of red, which is 255.00. Okay? All right. So we're still being a little geeky, but this is important stuff. Okay. I know when I say Photoshop that it scares some people because they think, well, I don't have money to buy Photoshop, or I don't want Photoshop. So actually we're going to be concentrating on the principles behind how to edit the pictures rather than specifically the Photoshop software itself. So just a little comparison of the different programs. We've got Adobe Photoshop. It's a very powerful program. It's kind of an industry standard. Just about everybody who works with graphics uses it, but it is expensive at roughly $600. Unless you're a student and you can get it much cheaper. But yeah, it's pretty expensive. So you have to be kind of serious about your photography in order to get Photoshop. There are some other ways to get it a little cheaper, but for someone walking into a retail store, that's what they're going to pay for it. Okay? The next one we'll play with a little bit is Adobe Photoshop Elements. And you first hear that, you think, well, it sounds like it's Photoshop, but it's actually a separate product. It's much less expensive. It's about $100, and it even comes with some cameras. I got a copy of it with one of the SLR cameras I bought. It's not nearly as powerful as Photoshop. There's a lot of features that have been removed from it, but it does have some of the most essential, some of the most basic things in it. So it's a good place to start if you don't want to make a large investment and you want to have some decent photo editing capability. So Adobe Photoshop Elements. A new version just shipped a short time ago. I've got it. We'll play with a demo of it here. It's actually not a bad program. Okay? Alright, so the next one I'll briefly mention is Corel Paint Shop Pro. And as far as its capabilities, it comes somewhere in between Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. It does more than Photoshop Elements, but not quite as much as Photoshop. It's fairly inexpensive. It's around $100. One of its cons, though, is it's not very widely used. You don't hear a lot of people talking about Paint Shop Pro. So, and then for people who don't want to spend any money at all, you've got a program called the Gimp. And it's kind of similar to Paint Shop Pro in its features and its capabilities. It's totally free. You don't have to pay anything for it. It's a little bit harder to use than some of the other programs, but its biggest drawback is that it is slow. And I mean slow. If you try working with an 8 or 10 megapixel image, you can plan on a lot of the different adjustments you're making taking 30, 45 seconds each time you make an adjustment. So, yeah. It's a great solution if you don't want to spend any money, but not something I would generally recommend otherwise. So, okay. Anybody else have any software that they like to use? I have a couple other things that I'll mention, but everybody here uses something I mentioned. There are a couple other free but limited options. If you got Windows Vista, it has something built in called Windows Photo Gallery. And most of the principles that we're going to be talking about today are things that you can actually do within that. It doesn't do a lot, but it helps you with some basic stuff. And if you buy a new Apple Mac, it comes with iPhoto. If you don't happen to have it on your Mac, you do have to buy it, but if you buy a new Mac, it comes with it. So that's another decent solution for doing the most basic image editing, which is kind of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. Okay? Alright, so I figured at this point we could just jump in and start playing with some pictures and see what we can do. So get our hands dirty, so to speak. All right, so I'll go ahead and bring up Photoshop. Once I get in here, you guys aren't seeing it, are you? Let's see. There we go. All right. Okay, I want to just demonstrate something here real quick. I've got this image up here, and you can see very clearly see that this is a nice block of cyan. And if you look over here in the layers palette, there is a red background behind it. And if I turn off the cyan, you can see the red, vice versa. So here we go. Now, remember we said that these are opposites? Let's see what happens when we start to mix them a little bit. So I'll just pull our slider down here to right around 50%. What happened?
It's gray.
It turned gray. Yeah, when you have opposite colors, they tend to cancel each other out. So if you start with red, you add cyan to it, you end up with something that is without color. You get a gray or a white. So that's something that's kind of important. We'll discuss that a little bit more as we go. But that's a very important principle, so keep that in mind. It's like if we have an image that's very red, we can often add some cyan to it to take some of that color out, and vice versa. So, okay, we're done with that. So I've got this picture here. It's a picture I shot the girl for her bridals. It looks like it's got some problems. And anybody see what's wrong here? Just want to.
It's kind of
It's
bluish.
grayish.
Yeah, it's got.
Kind of greenish.
It's definitely got kind of a bluish
With
green.
Everything in general, like if it were my bridal, is that what you're asking?
Well, just
Or just the
in terms of fixing it up to make it look good. Primarily, we've got a bluish green image.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing.
Doesn't look like very high contrast either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like kind of grayish.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to have a lot of contrast. The colors are definitely way off. It's got a very bluish, greenish, kind of a cyan sort of tint to it. Okay? All right. Now, the first thing I'm gonna do working with this image is I'm gonna go look at it in a histogram. So here we have histogram. That shows us our levels. On the far left side, that represents how much of the image is dark, contains dark pixels, and as you move over to the right, it gets lighter and lighter. So all the way to the full right of that graph would be anything that's fully at the maximum brightness. And we're seeing here that, yeah, the picture is kind of dark. It's not fully extending all the way to the right. And I'm just move my mouse around a little bit there so you guys can see that there's a little bit of space to the right of that graph. So we know that our image is a little bit too dark, and we're going to need to do something about that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a technique called levels. So image adjustment and then levels. This happens to be the first option on there. Here's our histogram again. You can definitely see that we need to brighten this image up. So we'll grab our little triangle here. So as I move that over, you should be able to see that the picture brightens up a little bit. So we're starting to see a little bit more what the image is supposed to look like, though it's still, the color is still off. Okay. While we're in here, just go ahead and we'll look at the individual channels. Here's a histogram of our red channel. Looks kind of low, doesn't it? Remember, the opposite of cyan is red. We're definitely missing some red in this image. You can tell by looking at the graph. Green, we're doing pretty good there. I mean, it's a little bit low, like the overall. And then blue's doing fairly well too. So our red definitely has an issue. So I'm not going to adjust it at this point, but we kind of get an idea from looking at the graph what's going on with the picture. We know that we've got too much cyan. We need some more red in there. Okay. All right. But first of all, we'll just go ahead and brighten that image up. Do that by adjusting the overall RGB. So say OK. And the image is a little bit brighter. I mean, it's still not perfect, but it's better than it was. Okay? All right, now I'm going to, since we're focusing on several different programs, this is Adobe Photoshop Elements. Looks quite a bit different, but it has some of the same features. So we go under, in this program we go under the Enhance menu, say Adjust Lighting, Levels. Same sort of thing. So here's a much cheaper program, and it's capable of doing the same sort of thing. And then preview off and preview on. You can definitely see that that helps to brighten it up a little bit. Okay, and along those same lines, I'll bring up the Gimp here. This is our free program. And then under colors, we have levels there as well. So under all these programs, we have the same tool that shows us a histogram and allows us to adjust the levels of the individual channels, red, green, and blue, as well as the overall brightness of the image. Okay? So I'll just point out a couple of these things that exist in all three programs a little bit, and then once we really get into this, we'll just stick to Photoshop exclusively. Okay, all right, so go back to Photoshop. Okay, all right, at this point we know that our color is off. Our color balance is not quite right. So I'm going to go into Image, Adjustments, and then we've got this feature called Color Balance. Okay, and here, you probably won't be able to read this online, but we've got sliders that let us select between red and cyan, magenta and green, yellow and blue. Does that sound familiar to anybody? We've got our opposite colors there. And then down at the bottom, these options here, this allows us to adjust the color balance in the shadows, in the midtones, and in the highlights. So we're talking about the darker parts of the image, the middle exposure, and then the brighter parts of the image. So just to see what we can do here, I'm going to go ahead and grab these sliders and start playing around. So we know that we've got too much cyan in this, and we need a little more red, so I'm going to grab the top slider here and just start moving it over to the right. Are we seeing a difference already?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually going to refer to my monitor here so I can get a good idea. Okay, so adjusted over towards red a little bit, away from cyan. And it's still looking a little bit green, so let's take the green magenta slider and move it a little bit over to the left. So it's a little bit hard to tell on the projector here, but the skin tones are looking pretty good. The lighter parts of the image, like her dress, definitely need to be worked on a little bit too. But her skin tones are actually looking pretty healthy. So we'll move on to the highlights, the brighter parts of the image, like her dress. And we'll do the same kind of thing. Move from cyan over towards red. We're looking better already, aren't we? And then take our magenta green slider and move it a little over to the magenta side. There we go, much better. And here you go, here's a before, there's an after. A little bit of a difference, huh? So, much better image there. And this is the way that the image actually should look, the way it was intended to be from the beginning. Okay? All right, now we'll jump over into Photoshop Elements, and it'll do the same kind of thing. Unfortunately, this program doesn't have the color balance feature, so we have to do it another way. And the way we do that is by using the Levels tool. And one quick way to get that is Control-L. You hit Control-L, and we'll start working on the individual channels. So we'll go to the red channel. Let's boost that up pretty good. That already is helping quite a bit. And then let's go to the green channel. The green channel maxes out pretty good. I'm not going to adjust the maximum or minimum. I'm going to adjust the midpoint here. Just kind of take the green down overall. So quite a bit better. So it's not perfect. There's still a little bit of green tones in her dress, but you know, as far as the tools that we've got available in this particular program, that's really about the best we can do without spending a whole lot of time on it. So you start playing with the Levels tool, and you can definitely improve things a bit. So try shifting towards red just a little bit. And that helps her skin tones a little bit there too. So
what does that middle one do there?
the middle one kind of adjusts the average point, so you can say, I want on average this picture to have more red in it, without having to adjust the maximum and minimum amount of red.
Okay, so the left side is the darkness.
Right.
So if you move it to the left, it would make it that color more prominent or less prominent?
Yeah, if you move the middle slider towards the left, it takes more of the areas that have less red in them and moves them more towards more red, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
So you're taking that middle point and you're actually shifting it. So you're taking and shifting more of the red towards the higher levels, if that makes any sense. So just by doing that, we've definitely improved the image quite a bit. So it's not perfect, but it's a good start. So
You do a preview on and off just to kind of see.
yeah, preview on and off. There's before, and there's after. We'll swap back and forth a few times. So just by adjusting our levels, we've dramatically improved the image, and doing it on individual channels. Okay? All right, now I'm not going to do the same thing in the Gimp, because the Gimp actually has the color balance tool that we had in Photoshop, so definitely a little easier to do there. Okay, all right, so one of the next things we want to work on is I want to make these colors in this picture really pop. I want them to make it really stand out. So that makes it look like a much more professional photo. One of the tools that we can sometimes use to do that is called saturation, and you can get to that Control U. It's the hue and saturation tool. Saturation just controls how intense the colors are. So if I start to shift it over, you can see that the colors are definitely more intense. But what's it doing to her skin? It's making it look like she's been to the tanning salon a few too many times. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to stay away from doing the saturation. All right, now.
And if you drop that out, it goes black and white.
Yeah, if I drop the saturation all the way down, the whole picture goes black and white, because that removes all the color. And you're left with just the black and white image. So, but in this particular case, we want the color. We want to have it be very vivid, very vibrant, really pop right off the screen or the paper if we print it. And there's one way to do that seems to be overlooked an awful lot. And okay, a minute ago we talked about opposite colors. If you've got red and you add cyan to it, what happens? It turns gray, turns white, yeah. So it loses its saturation by adding the opposite color. Okay, now say for example, if we've got something in the image that has 100% of red, 50% of green, and 10% of blue. Okay, it's going to be kind of an orange color. We want that color to be more orange. What do we have to remove from it?
Whatever the opposite of orange is.
Yeah, the opposite of orange is going to be kind of a bluish. Yeah, so we want to get rid of all that blue. So we want to take that 10% of the blue and get rid of it. And the way we do that is actually by adjusting the contrast, the difference between the brightest and the lightest parts. So we want the red to stay high. We want the green to kind of stay in the middle where it's at, and then we want the blue to just kind of disappear. So we use the contrast tool. And one thing we've got here right in Photoshop is brightness and contrast. Okay, so I can just take this contrast slider and start to slide it up. What happens to the colors? They get a little more intense, don't they? See, I'll toggle back and forth. So that's kind of washed out, and the colors pop a little bit more there. But the problem with doing that is that you actually push some of those individual channels past their maximum or minimum. And we don't necessarily want to do that, because once you push them past the maximum, you start to lose some of the color. Yeah, it washes out. So we want to avoid that. So the tool I like to use to do this kind of thing is I can find it, the curves tool. Unfortunately, this is not available in Photoshop Elements. It does have something similar, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But this is a really nifty way to take the original image and then shift its different color values to something else. So what we've got here across the bottom, these are our existing picture, the levels from black to white, or minimum brightness to maximum brightness. And then the output values are here along the left side. And this line represents how those values are going to be translated. So let me move this out of the way, and I'll just grab this and start moving it around. So in this particular case, if we have a mid-tone on the input, it's being translated to something kind of high on the output. So basically the image is being washed out here. And you guys have probably seen pictures where they do this kind of effect, where maybe they show a picture of somebody's face and it's lost all of the details except their eyes, that kind of thing. And that's one of the ways that they do this, by taking your midtones and shifting them upwards. And you're not really losing any picture detail by doing this, you're just redistributing the light that's already there. So you don't have to worry about things being clipped on the upper end or on the lower end. Nothing's being thrown away. Okay? Now, one of the best ways that I've found to use the color balance tool is what we call an S-curve. So I'll just put a couple of points on here. I should ask if everybody's following here. This is kind of a complicated tool, and it's one that a lot of people shy away from when they're playing with Photoshop because it's a little hard to understand. But everybody following what we've done so far? Okay. All right. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to take the darker values, so our point down here, and I'm going to shift them down and make them a little bit darker. So you can see that her hair got kind of darker. Didn't affect her face. Didn't affect her dress. And the other thing that I'll do is I'll take and move the upper values a little bit upward. And it's probably a little bit much, but okay, that image pops quite a bit more, I think. I mean, there's a little bit of blowout in there, and that's because I probably did a little bit too much on the levels, but it definitely pops a little bit more, especially when I turn off the preview here. There's your before, there's your after. Definite difference in the quality of that image. So, but just by using the curves tool and shifting some of the darker areas towards black and some of the brighter areas towards white, we get a much more intriguing image. And like I mentioned a minute ago, if we have our orange color that's 100% red, 50% green, 10% blue, what's happening to that blue value that's in there if we're applying this curve to it? If we got 10% blue, that's going to be down here. Yeah, it's being dropped. And so some of that washing out effect we get by adding an opposite color is going away. So basically what's happening is all of our colors are going to look more pure, more intense, more vivid, just by adjusting levels. We haven't actually gone through and said, I want to remove green, at least not at this point. We've just said, I want to take things that are not very bright and I want to make them darker, and I want to take the things that are bright and make them a little bit brighter. Give it additional contrast, really make it pop. So, everybody follow that? Okay, I'll do that here, and then we'll go over into Photoshop Elements, and then I'll find kind of an equivalent tool here. So we've got Adjust Color Curves. This is kind of similar, but it's not nearly as flexible. Instead of being able to drag these individual points down here on the graph, all we can do is adjust highlights, make them brighter, take our shadows, make them darker. So we end up with a similar kind of curve, but we don't have the same kind of control that we do in the full version of Photoshop. So we can do some of the same kinds of things. We're just limited in how much control we have over them. So definitely a difference between those two images. There isn't there? Okay. Everybody follow? And before and after. Definitely a better image. Okay? Alright, so let's move on and we'll actually play with something else. Play with a different image. Okay. I was hoping that Dustin was going to be here tonight because we're going to play with one of his photos. Okay, as this comes up. Alright, here's a picture I shot when Dustin got married a couple months ago. It's a pretty cool image, don't you think? I like it. The colors on it seem pretty good. Overall, the exposure seems right. And so at this point, I kind of start thinking about, well, what can I do to make this more interesting? One of my favorite effects, black and white. Sometimes we forget that we can do black and white images, but in Photoshop we can do that, like we mentioned earlier, by just removing all the saturation. But we also have a desaturate option. that we can use. Does the exact same thing. And it's also got this nifty little black and white tool in here. And the neat thing about this is this lets us control what colors are weighted more heavily for coming up with a black and white image. Say, for example, we've got those yellow flowers in there. And say we want those to not be quite so bright in the final image. We can actually take the yellows and bring them down. And you can see that it de-emphasizes anything that's yellow in the picture. So, and then maybe we want to take the green background and de-emphasize that a little bit. So we just take our greens and bring them down. So there's our before, there's our after. Okay. Anybody think of anything else that we could do to this to make it a little more intimate, a little more intriguing, to draw you into the picture a little bit more? It's probably the most simple thing that you can do with your photos. Well, we could do a tint. Yeah, we could do that. That's one thing we could do. If you want to do a sepia tone, you use the hue and saturation. The hue value for a good sepia is right around 40. Oh, sorry, we'd have to colorize first. Yeah, let's see. 40 for the hue. Saturation of 25 is pretty good. So there's a sepia tone. Okay. That's not a bad way to go. We can certainly do that. That's a nice look. Okay. I was actually thinking that one of the neat things we could do with this is maybe crop it down to something else, something smaller. Make it more intimate. So I'm going to grab the cropping tool here, and I'm going to specify, I'm just going to go ahead and give it the width and height so that we get a true square. That's what I'm after. And then just drag and drop and crop it just like that. What kind of a feeling does that have versus the previous version of the photo? Yeah, you feel like you're right there next to them, enjoying this moment that they have together, more so than the previous image. So, it's one thing to keep in mind. Cropping an image is probably one of the most basic yet most effective ways of changing the feeling of a picture. If you want to really get in close and put yourself in that particular situation, cropping is a good way to do that. And just removing the extra details. Remember we talked about keeping it simple? KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Mm-hmm. And one way to do that is by cropping our images. So, cropping tool is definitely a great way to go. So, okay. All right. Let's see. That cropping, of course, is available in other programs as well. Now, I remember marking another program, or another image that I wanted to play with. Oh, here we go. Okay, there we've got an engagement picture I shot a couple years ago. Anybody have any opinions on what might be wrong or kind of weird with this picture?
It's a little blue-purple.
Yeah, the color's a little bit off, so we'll play with that.
I don't know if you could make them pop out more than the background's like really light. I don't know if we can make it a little bit darker so that they kind of stand out a little bit more.
Yeah, we could play with that and see what we can come up with. Something there.
It's not very sharply focused.
It's a little bit off. And that's mostly a function of the projector here and whatnot. The picture is actually okay as far as focus goes. So, the thing I personally find most distracting about this image is the... Pardon?
The thing I find most distracting is that these semi-off diagonal lines.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, the lines in the picture, they aren't straight up and down. They aren't on a nice diagonal. They're just weird. And so that's going to be one of the first things that I'm going to play with here. So I'm going to try and straighten this up a little bit. And I'm going to use kind of an advanced tool to do this. Filter, if I remember where it is, distort, lens correction. Okay, this is something that's only available in the full Photoshop, but you can obviously do rotation in some of these other programs. So I'm going to grab the straighten tool here. So I'm going to click and drag across one of these diagonal lines. Okay, so there we go. We've straightened it up quite a bit. Better image? What do we think? I like it better personally, just because it's not, you don't have the distraction of the strange angles.
This is how you do the knife.
So anyway, that's one thing that we can do. I mean, obviously this is a creative problem, and we have other options that we can do as well. But let's also play with the color balance a little bit. Oh, wait,
Of
go
course,
ahead.
that's leaving your corners
Yeah,
exposed. So if you try to crop that square again, you lose your ring, right?
You will lose some. So there are ways of, let's see, I'm still in square mode. There are ways of trying filling in the corners a little bit, or whatnot. But you want to be real careful when you rotate things. And maybe instead of rotating it to be perfectly straight, I should have just rotated it to be closer to being straight, so I wouldn't have to crop off quite as much. See, in this particular case, yeah, I'm going to lose a ring if I crop it like this. So rotating it this much might not be a good idea, but that's something to watch out for. And make sure that your pictures are actually straight. If you've got horizontal lines in them, straighten them up, vertical lines, and so forth. So
Where did you get to that? How did you get to that straightening thing?
the one that I used is under, let's see, I'll get out of here. It's under Filter,
Lens
Distort,
correction.
Lens Correction.
And how did you draw that line? Because when I did that, that's...
The tool in the upper left here.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, the straighten tool.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And actually, while I'm in, and see, I'll just undo, go all the way back to my original, and then Filter, Distort, Lens Correction. All right, so. Okay, I'm just gonna not go quite as much. Okay, it's definitely better. Okay, and then it's got this nifty feature down here for scaling, so you actually zoom while you're in here. And we're gonna lose a ring again, but not a whole lot can be done about
Right
that.
on the edge.
Yeah.
So, there, we've cropped it so that we actually have all of our background, well, the background is completely full. And we've got straighter lines, not near as distracting as it was before. So, we'll call that good. It's not perfect, but okay. And as was mentioned earlier, the color on this one is a little bit off. So I'm going to go back to our infamous color balance tool, and it's a little bit too blue, right? And if you were going to guess, would you say that shadows, midtones, or highlights where it's most off?
Shadows.
Shadows? You think shadows?
Shadows to midtones.
Shadows and midtones mostly, yeah. The highlights seem to be okay. I don't really see any blue cast there in the highlights in the background. So we'll play with the midtones to start with. So we'll just shift it a little towards yellow. I'm looking kind of sickly. Need to add a little bit of red in there. So before, after. What do we think? Better? Call that good? As far as the midtones? Okay, let's play the shadows a little bit. The shadows, we can shift a little bit towards yellow. Yeah, it's still looking a little sickly. And then shift just a hair towards red. A little much. Before, after. What do we think? Better? Okay. Yeah, I like that better too. So we'll call that good for that. So definitely improved the look of that image. So let's try and play with, I'm actually going to play with the levels just a little bit. Overall, it's got a little too much red for my taste, so I'm going to bring that down just a bit. Okay, so looks a little pale on the projector, but on screen it looks okay. All right, so let's do before and after on this. Here's our original image. Here's the image we've come up with. Better picture, I think.
Yeah,
So, just by doing a couple of quick things, and some of the most basic tools. We haven't done anything fancy. We haven't gone through and tried to take care of any skin problems, anything like that. We've just worked on our colors and in this case rotated a little bit and adjusted some levels. So okay, definitely a better image there. Okay, all right, now Speaking of playing with skin, inevitably, whenever you take pictures, somebody's not going to have perfect skin. Fortunately, most modern tools have, most modern software has ways of taking care of that. And we've got this little tool over here. It's called the healing brush tool. This is also available in Photoshop Elements, so you don't have to get the expensive program to get that. We don't have a lot of skin problems here, but we'll just kind of play with it for a little bit here. I'm going to decrease the size of my brush a little bit and find some skin on this girl that looks pretty clear. Usually people's necks are pretty good, at least on girls. On guys, maybe if they got a little bit of beard going on, you don't want to do that. But we're just trying to find a place of the skin that's clean and doesn't have any problems. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that as a template kind of to copy to another part of the image. So she's got a couple of little spots on her skin here, so we'll just draw over those areas using the healing brush, and what happens? They kind of disappear. So
What do you have to push when you're on the neck? I know you're supposed to
yeah, when you're taking the sample, you hold down the alternate, I believe it's Option key on the Mac, and then click on the area that you want to sample from. So
I noticed it's not a direct copy, so it's actually matching.
right, it's copying the texture pretty much, and then keeping the color of whatever you're drawing over the top of. So it's a pretty intelligent little tool. Kind of amazing, to be honest.
It's much better than the stamp tool that I used to use.
Yeah, we used to have to use the clone stamp tool where it's making an exact copy. In that case, your color is wrong, your edges might not match up, you know, all sorts of issues. And this spot healing brush is a wonderful tool. So I'm just going to make a couple other small little corrections here. Nothing too big, 'cause I don't want to spend forever on this. But we can definitely clean up people's skin. By the way, if you're using one of the Adobe products, you can hold down the space bar and click and drag, and that pans your image. You don't have to go find a separate tool to do that. Or you can actually grab on the preview in the upper right and move around there. So you can very quickly navigate in your picture. So a couple other little small areas that will clean up a bit. So I usually spend more time doing this on girls than guys, just because guys don't seem to care quite as much. So, a couple little minor issues on him. Finding some clear skin on him is going to be a little bit more problematic because he's got kind of a 5 o'clock shadow going on, but just clean it up a little bit. And it's kind of surprising how much little touch-ups like this can make a big difference in your image. So, what do we think? It's not perfect, but it looks all right. Now I'll show you one of my favorite little tricks. This works in any of the programs that we've talked about. Talked about making colors really pop. Now I really like to make people's eye color really pop. So I'm going to go through here, just draw around her eye. I'll do both of them at the same time. Okay, it's not a perfect selection, but not bad. And then I'm going to soften the edges on the selection a little bit so that when I make an adjustment it isn't so abrupt, it doesn't look so jarring. I'm just going to give it a 3 pixel edge. And then we use our saturation tool. Before, after. It's kind of subtle, but helps to make someone's eye color pop out a little bit more. For some reason, people's eye color doesn't generally show up very well on camera. So, just a little bit of pop there. Okay? Quick little tip, one of my things I like to do on photos that I take. Alright, now I'm going to show you, this is one of my favorite things to do on photos, most especially on like bridals and wedding photos, that kind of thing. And this is kind of tricky. This also works in any of the programs I've mentioned. basically what we've got going on here is we're going to take this image, we're going to make a copy of it, and the way we're going to do this, just real quick, I'm not going to go over every step in detail, but we're going to take the layer, drag it down here to the new layer button. That actually makes a copy of it. So we have two copies of the same thing laying on top of one another. And then we'll go up to Filter, Blur, Lens Blur, and we're actually going to make this copy of the image blurry. You're probably thinking, why in the world do we want to do that? Well, I'm going to show you a really quick, cool thing that we can do. Once I take that blurry image, I can take its opacity, make it somewhat transparent, say about 30% opaque. Okay, and I'll turn that layer on and off. You guys tell me what you see happening.
Just softer looking.
Yeah. Softens it, makes it look more heavenly, more ethereal. And people with bad skin will love this too because it helps to remove blemishes a little bit, just to disguise them a little bit. So, very subtle effect. I don't use it all the time, but on certain images I'll use it and it really helps quite a bit. So, one of my trademark and favorite things to do on a photo. So, that's just a couple other things. Anybody have any questions about how to do something in Photoshop? I mean, we've only got one class to try and cover this, and I know there's a lot that we can do, but if you guys have any questions on something we can do. Dave, as you're watching, do you have anything that in particular that you like to do with Photoshop that we haven't covered here?
Well, I love the healing tool. I use that all the time.
Yeah, healing tool.
You went over contrast, right? Just
Yeah.
make it pop a little
Yeah,
bit.
did the curves. Yeah, cropping.
I like to warm it, just like you did.
Yeah,
So you think you got
Warming an
most
image?
of almost my
Okay.
things.
all right.
On an earlier photo, some of the flowers. What if you wanted to make just some of the flowers be a little more vibrant, but you didn't want to affect her dress and
Okay,
her skin?
that's a good question. All right, well, yeah, let's go over that because we can actually do that really fast. So, I'm opening a recent photo. Is this the one you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah, because it still feels like she's too tanned.
Yeah.
Artificially.
Let me actually go back to the original on that one because that one's a little bit too much. Got a little bit too much vibrance to start with. Let's see, Kylie Bridal. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is what I ended up. Sorry, this is not my final image. This is actually just a starting image. Okay, so we want to take these flowers and we want to make them a little bit more vibrant. So obviously we've got some yellow and some red in there. One of our coolest things we can do in Photoshop, we use our hue and saturation tool. Control U gets you there real fast. And we go up to here in the edit menu, and we've got controls to change any of these colors. Reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, magentas. What are those colors? Have we seen those before? So, okay, we got our reds. We start by choosing reds, and then we boost our saturation on our reds. So, that's the quick way of doing it. I mean, obviously you can take time to go through and select all of those portions of the image and take care of that. So let's go ahead and do the yellows here as well.
Right, but that's still affecting her skin.
Yeah, it will to some degree.
So do you have to mask out just to the flowers? Or
Well,
something?
there's other ways of doing it here. It's like whenever we choose one of these things, say for example, I'll click on reds. We get an eyedropper tool here. So we come down and we actually click on the flower, and that's saying that's the color we want to be modifying.
Oh.
And then this little area up here lets us choose how many colors, or how far away on the color spectrum we want to be modifying. So we can just play with that a little bit. So now as we boost our saturation, it's not affecting her skin quite as much. Her skin's not really in that area. If we wanted to, though, we could certainly just select that portion of the image and use the lasso tool. Just kind of highlight around there. Whoops. Hard to draw backwards. I'm going to try it again. Okay, so yeah, we've got just that selection. And then we can start playing with the colors in there. And whenever we make the changes, it only affects the areas that are selected. So let's go ahead and do that real quick, so it's nice and easy to do. So we'll take our reds, sample from the flower, reduce that range a little bit so we're not affecting so much the other areas of the image quite so much. And then boost our saturation some. Make that pop, and then we'll do the same thing with our yellows. And I'll sample that as well. If you look at this, it actually seems not like that's more of a yellow-green than just a straight yellow. So it's a good thing we clicked on that, or we might have missed it entirely. Reduce the range and boost that saturation a little bit. So there's before, and there's after. So we'll hide the lasso there. So yeah, and lots of little tools like that are available. I mean, I could literally spend 5 weeks just teaching Photoshop tricks, but that's an easy one. Just quickly tweak parts of the image. So, any other questions people had? Things they want to see done, things that they like to see done in the picture. I think the biggest thing that we can do to make an image really pop is the curves tool that we did, where we took the dark levels and brought them down, and the brighter levels and brought those up. So that really helps to make the colors more intense, helps to remove some of the unwanted darker tones that we don't want. It increases the overall contrast, makes an image look more appealing and better. So, Paul, do you have?
What would be the best way to put a vignette on a picture like
Okay, a vignette. Okay, anybody who doesn't know, a vignette is the effect that's created. The technical definition is it's the effect created by a lens at the outer edges where it gets darker, just because the lens doesn't let quite as much light in at the outer edges. So what Paul's asking is how we would create a false vignette on an image. The way I like to do that is I use the oval selection tool here, and then select the area of the image that I kind of want to remain at its original levels. And then I want to soften the edge, so I use the select, modify, feather. I know I'm going fast, but I'm trying to keep this down to a minimum. I need to go with a nice big radius here. I'll actually go with like 80 pixels on this. And then what I want to do is I want to affect the areas outside this circle, and I've currently got the circle itself selected, so I want to go to select and then inverse, and that selects the outer portions of it. And at that point, I can use the levels tool, drop the output level, and that darkens the outer portions of the image. So you get kind of a vignette effect that helps you to focus a lot more.
So when you use the feather tool, it changes the the radius of the circle, but it's doing more than that. It's like making like almost a border around it.
Yeah, it's saying instead of there being a hard edge here, I want to spread that edge out over a wider area, so that as we're making changes, and on the inside, it changes more than it does on the outside. So
because lots of times when I've been doing editing in the past, like I'll edit something out or something, but you can still kind of see exactly where the line was, where it drew around it. So
feathering the edge is one good way to do that. And if you happen to be using the newest Photoshop CS3, it's got a really nifty tool for trying to get perfect edges around your selections, but that's way beyond what we want to cover here tonight. So I won't get into that. So Jared, did you have a comment, question?
Yeah. Sometimes I'll be taking a picture and another picture like in the same place, and the lighting turns out to be totally different between the two. Is there a way to bring them both to the middle, or are you just kind of stuck?
Well, an easy way to do that, to take care of that, is make sure if you got a camera that takes raw photos, you take it in RAW, and then as you're bringing it into Photoshop, you actually adjust the exposure and the color balance and stuff to make it match between the two. There is a feature in Photoshop to try and match the colors between two images, but I've never had it work right, so I quit using it. Otherwise, you're stuck using tools like your levels, your balance, things like that to try and bring it up, and it's just a lot of manual labor in order to try and get that to match up perfectly. So, any other questions, comments? We're right in an hour now, so it's probably about time to wrap up. But thanks, guys, for being here, and thanks everybody at home for watching. I will be answering any questions via email. I'll keep the email address up. It's photoclass@ maxoutput.com. Certainly be happy to answer any questions that you have. And I will be getting these videos online at some point, I promise. And when I do that, I'll be sure and email everybody as well. But thanks again for watching, and happy photography. We'll see ya.